She didn't scream. She didn't cry. When Damen Blackwood walked through the front door of their $12 million Manhattan estate with another woman on his arm, a woman visibly pregnant with his child, Victoria Sterling Blackwood did something no one in that room expected. She smiled, calm, controlled, like a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She slid the diamond ring off her finger, set it on the marble entry table without a sound, and walked away. Damen thought he had finally broken her. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse on the most expensive mistake of his life. The night it all began, the temperature in Manhattan had dropped to 9 degrees. The city smelled like exhaust, old snow, and something chemical and sharp that clung to the back of your throat if you stood too long near the street vents. Victoria Sterling Blackwood was standing in the kitchen of the estate on West 74th Street. She wasn't there because she needed to be, but because it was the only room in the house that felt honest. There was marble everywhere else, gold fixtures, crown molding painted 3 times over by some restorer Damien had flown in from Florence, who spoke no English and billed by the hour. The kitchen at least had function. It had purpose. A copper pot on the stove, the smell of something real. She was 41 years old, and she looked it. Not in the way women in her world usually did, surgically smoothed and injected back towards some version of 30 that never actually existed, but in the way that meant she had lived. There were lines at the corners of her eyes, and she had stopped pretending to hate them 2 years ago. Her dark hair was pulled back. She wore a cream silk blouse and dark trousers and no jewelry except the ring, which she had been wearing for 12 years and which sometimes felt like a collar she had simply grown accustomed to. Her phone had been ringing since 4 in the afternoon. Marcus Webb, her estate manager, and one of the few people she still trusted without qualification, had left 3 messages. The third one said only that he was on his way, he wasn't alone, and to prepare herself. Marcus never said to prepare herself. In 9 years of working together through audits and legal challenges, and the kind of quiet financial disasters that Damien generated the way other men generated dirty laundry, Marcus had never once used those words. That alone told her everything. She turned the stove off. She dried her hands on a dish towel. She walked to the front of the house. She heard the cars before she saw the headlights. 2 black SUVs coming up the private drive, moving faster than they should have on the ice. Damien's security team was like that. Young men who had been given weapons and authority before they had any real sense. Men who drove too fast and talked too loud and mistook aggression for competence. She had told Damen this for years. He thought it was charming. The front door opened before she reached the foyer. Damen Blackwood came in first. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had been genuinely handsome in his 30s. Now at 47 he was still striking in the way that powerful men often are, not because of what they look like, but because of what they project. He wore a black cashmere coat over a charcoal suit. His dark hair was going gray at the temples, and he had let it because he knew it worked for him. He had a glass of something in his hand that someone had handed him in the car, and he hadn't finished. When he walked through the door, his eyes found Victoria immediately, and something moved behind them. Not guilt, not quite. Something calculating, something braced. Then Vanessa Collins walked in behind him. She was 32. She had worked in corporate acquisitions at a firm Damen had invested in heavily 3 years ago, which was how they had met, or at least how the meeting had been explained to Victoria at the time as a professional dinner. A useful contact, nothing worth mentioning twice. She was tall, and she wore a long camel coat that was unbuttoned, and beneath it unmistakably the rounded shape of advanced pregnancy. 7 months, Victoria estimated, maybe 8. Behind Vanessa came 2 of Damien's bodyguards. Then his personal attorney, Raymond Cho, who was a compact Korean-American man in his 50s who had the eyes of someone who had seen too many rooms like this one and had long since stopped feeling anything about them. Raymond was holding a leather folder, and he did not look at Victoria. 3 household staff had gathered at the edge of the foyer. Marcus was at the top of the stairs. No one spoke. Damen looked at Victoria and spread his hands in a gesture that was somehow both apologetic and triumphant. The gesture of a man who has rehearsed something and is now performing it and knows the audience is watching. Victoria, he said. That was all, just her name, as if the rest of the sentence was already obvious. Damien, she said. He looked at Vanessa. Something passed between them. A nod, a small movement, the signal they had worked out in advance. Vanessa put one hand on her stomach and lifted her chin slightly. This is Vanessa, Damien said. You know who she is. Victoria said nothing. She is going to be staying here, he said. I want the East Wing prepared, her own suite, her own staff access. We will handle the formal arrangements through Raymond. He glanced toward his attorney, who still hadn't looked up. I wanted to do this in person, face to face, Damien said. I think you deserve that. One of the household staff made a small sound and immediately suppressed it. Victoria looked at Damien for a long moment. Then she looked at Vanessa, who was watching her with an expression that was somewhere between defiance and dread. The expression of someone who had told themselves a story about this moment and was not entirely sure the story was going to hold. Victoria looked at the ring on her hand. She had chosen it herself. Actually, Damien had offered to take her to a jeweler, but she had already known what she wanted. A square-cut diamond, 3 carats, platinum band, no ornamentation, clean lines, something that would last. She had worn it through 2 miscarriages and 1 bout of illness that had kept her hospitalized for a week. She had worn it through every dinner party and charity gala and board meeting where she had stood beside this man and made him look legitimate. She pulled it off her finger. The sensation was strange, a ring of compressed air where it had been, her skin already beginning to remember what it felt like without it. She set it on the marble table by the door. The sound it made was very small. I will have Marcus prepare the East Wing, she said. Damen blinked. Whatever he had expected, tears, a scene, raised voices, something he could use. This was not it. That's he started. Get some rest, Victoria said. It's late. She walked past him, past Vanessa, past Raymond Cho, who finally looked up and whose eyes, when they met hers, contained something she did not expect from him. Recognition. As if he knew something she did not, or as if he had just realized something about her that he had missed until now. She climbed the stairs. She went to her bedroom. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she put both hands flat on her thighs. She breathed through her nose, and she waited for whatever was going to come. Grief, maybe rage. The long-delayed arrival of something she had been holding at bay for a very long time. What came instead was clarity, sharp and cold and almost chemical, the way the air had smelled outside. Her mind began to move. By 2 in the morning, she was at her desk. Victoria Sterling had not always been wealthy. That was the part of her story that Manhattan liked to forget. Because Manhattan had a talent for absorbing people whole and then presenting them as if they had always existed in their current form, already polished, already powerful, already belonging. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house with 1 bathroom and a furnace that quit every February. The daughter of a civil engineer who worked long hours, and a mother who kept the books for 2 small businesses in town. Her mother had the kind of mathematical mind that could hold multiple complex systems in place simultaneously without losing a single thread. Her mother's name was Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor had died 6 years ago, and Victoria still felt her absence the way you feel a missing tooth. Not constantly, but whenever she pressed against that particular place. Victoria had inherited Eleanor's mind, the kind that didn't think in straight lines, but in networks, in connections, in the relationship between things. She had gone to Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship and then to Columbia Law on a full one. She had arrived in New York City at 24 with $1,100 in her checking account and a capacity for sustained attention that most people found slightly unnerving. She had met Damen at a fundraiser for a legal aid organization. He had been 35 then, already rich, already connected, already generating the kind of gravity that made rooms arrange themselves around him. He was funny in a sharp, slightly dangerous way. He was attentive in a manner she had not yet learned to recognize as performance. He had asked her questions and then actually listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. She had fallen in love with a version of him that she now understood had been carefully constructed for her consumption. The marriage had been good for 3 years, maybe 4, if she was being generous. After that, it had been functional, then managed, then simply structured. Two people maintaining an arrangement because the arrangement served purposes neither of them had fully articulated. Damen needed Victoria's name, her connections, her credibility. The Sterling family had been respected in Ohio, and she had built something of her own reputation in New York through her legal work, and later through her directorship at two significant charitable foundations. She made Damien look like something other than what he was. What he was, she had understood by year 5, was a man who operated in several worlds simultaneously and was fully honest in none of them. The legitimate businesses were real, but they were also cover. The political connections were genuine, but they were transactional in ways that wouldn't survive scrutiny. There were partnerships with men whose money came from places that didn't hold up to examination. Not all of it, not even most of it, she had told herself for a while, but enough. Enough that she had made a decision. She had not left. That was the choice that she had struggled with the most in the years since. The one she examined from different angles in the small hours of nights like this one. She had not left because leaving meant losing access, and losing access meant losing the ability to do what she had started doing very quietly, very carefully, beginning in year 6 of the marriage. Building the architecture of her own exit. It started small. A trust established in her name, seeded with her own inherited funds, structured in a way that was clean and legal and completely separate from anything Damien touched. Then a second trust, a holding company, a series of property transfers that her own attorneys had arranged with the discretion she had paid for at significant cost. She had spent 4 years documenting, not because she intended to destroy him, not initially, but because she had understood instinctively that the only protection she had was knowledge, paper evidence of what was real versus what was performed. The mansion on West 74th Street was one of 4 properties she had moved into her own trust name over the course of 3 years. She used a series of transactions that Damen's accountants had processed without fully understanding because they were Damien's accountants, not hers. He had signed documents he hadn't read because she had always handled the administrative complexity of their shared holdings, and he had considered this the natural order of things. The East Wing he had just promised to his pregnant mistress was housed in a building that Vanessa Collins, Raymond Cho, and Damen Blackwood himself did not yet know was no longer Damen Blackwood's to give. Victoria sat at her desk at 2 in the morning, and she opened her laptop. She began composing the first in a series of emails that would take 11 days to complete their full effect. Marcus Webb was 54, and he had worked for the Sterling family before he had ever worked for anyone named Blackwood. He had managed Eleanor Sterling's modest affairs in Dayton during her later years. When Victoria had moved to New York and eventually married and eventually begun accumulating the complexity that required someone like Marcus full-time, she had brought him with her. He occupied a peculiar position in the Blackwood household, trusted by Victoria completely, acknowledged by Damien as useful, understood by neither of Damien's people as the central pillar of operational intelligence that he actually was. At 6 in the morning, he knocked twice on Victoria's study door and came in without waiting because she had already texted him. He was a big man, Marcus, the kind of big that came from decades of physical labor before he had transitioned into management. Broad across the back, with hands that still looked like they belonged on a construction site. He had gray eyes and a quiet manner, and he set 2 cups of coffee on the desk without ceremony. Raymond Cho left at 4 o'clock, he said. I know, Victoria said. He took a photograph of the front entry table before he left. The ring. Victoria looked up from the laptop. He was standing in the foyer at 3:47 a.m. taking photographs of the ring, she said. Of the ring and the surrounding area. Wide shot, close shot. She thought about that. They are building a narrative, she said. That I accepted this, that I walked away voluntarily, that the terms were civil. That would be my red, Marcus said. They are going to try to use the next 48 hours, she said. Establish possession, establish occupancy, create a factual record that the household was transferred in the context of a mutual agreement. Marcus nodded. He had understood this already. He was nodding, not in response to new information, but in confirmation that their assessments aligned. "Who is in the East Wing now?" she asked. "Two of his staff. A woman named Bella, who is Vanessa's personal assistant, and a man I don't recognize who arrived with the second car. He has been in the East Wing study since 11. Get me photographs," she said. Marcus put his phone on the desk. He had already taken them. Victoria scrolled through. The man she didn't recognize was lean and dark-haired, mid-40s, with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being in rooms where things were being decided. He was sitting at the desk in the East Wing study with a laptop and what appeared to be a set of printed financial documents. "Do you know him?" Marcus asked. "I have seen him once," Victoria said. 18 months ago at a dinner Damien held at the Pierre. He was introduced as a consultant from Chicago. He didn't give a last name and I didn't push it. "Chicago consultant," Marcus said. "Chicago. Yes." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A slight recalibration. They both knew what Chicago consultant meant in the context of Damien's network. "How long before they realize the East Wing is in the trust?" Marcus asked. "Depends on how careful their title search is," Victoria said. "Raymond is good. He will find it within 36 hours if he's looking directly. If he assumes the transfer paperwork is what it appears to be, longer." "And the accounts?" Victoria looked at the laptop screen. "I have already sent the first 3 instructions. The holding company accounts will begin restriction at 9 a.m. The property management company that handles the nightclub leases will receive a change of authority notice this morning, and I have authorized Marcus Webb Consulting to conduct a full operational audit of the estate accounts, which is something you and I set up the framework for 2 years ago, and which I am now formally activating." Marcus picked up his coffee. He drank it slowly. "Victoria," he said. "Marcus, are you all right?" She looked at him. It was an honest question from someone who had known her long enough to ask it without it being sentimental. "No," she said. "But I am going to be." He nodded. He stood up at the door. He paused. "There is one more thing," he said. "Vanessa Collins. I did the research you asked me to do 6 weeks ago. You have the file." "I have the file," she said. "Then you know about the promotion." "I know about all 3 promotions," Victoria said, "and the performance reviews that supported them, and the signature on 2 of those reviews." Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. "She may not have known the full picture," he said about what he was setting up. "I know," Victoria said. "That's why she is in the file, but she is not the target." He left. Victoria turned back to the laptop. The coffee went cold. She didn't notice. Damen slept until 9:30, which was later than usual, which told her he had been drinking after she went upstairs. She had heard it, the particular acoustic pattern of a man moving through a large house in the dark, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening, the heavier closing of it. She had lain in the dark and listened and felt nothing that she could name, or nothing she was willing to name yet, and eventually she had gone back to the desk. He appeared in the doorway of the breakfast room at 9:45, dressed but disheveled in the specific way of men who have slept in their clothes and think a shower covers it. He looked at her across the table with an expression she recognized. The morning after expression, the recalibration, the reassessment of what had happened the night before and how it had gone versus how he had expected it to go. She was eating toast and reading a document on her phone. She looked up when he appeared and then looked back down. "You didn't have to sleep in the study," he said. "I was working," she said. "Victoria." He came into the room. He sat down across from her, which was not what she expected. She had expected him to stand to maintain the posture of the confrontation from the night before. Instead, he sat and he put his forearms on the table, and he leaned forward slightly, and his voice, when it came, was quieter, almost reasonable. "I know this is hard," he said. She said nothing. "I know this is not what you wanted. I know that, but I needed to do this the right way. I needed to be honest with you rather than you brought her to our home," Victoria said. "You had Raymond photograph the entry at 4 in the morning. You have a Chicago consultant in my East Wing going through financial documents." Damen's expression shifted slightly. Not guilty, more like recalculating. "What are you going to do?" he said. It was a genuine question. She could hear it. After all the performance of the night before, the staged entrance, the calculative humiliation, this was the real conversation. the one he needed to have to understand how much danger he was in. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I am going to finish my toast," she said. She looked back down at her phone. He sat there for another full minute. She could feel it, the effort to read her, to find the angle, to understand what the absence of visible reaction meant. Damen Blackwood had built his entire life on his ability to read people. He had always believed he could read her. The fact that he couldn't was the most dangerous thing about him. Men who believe they can read you do not prepare for the possibility that you have been reading them for years. He left without speaking. 20 minutes later, she heard him on the phone in the hallway, his voice low and taut, saying Raymond's name twice. The first call came at 11:43 from a man named David Reeves, who was the managing director of a real estate investment group that Damen had a 40% stake in. David was 60, cautious, the kind of businessman who had survived 30 years by being attentive to early signals. He called Victoria's private cell, not Damien's line, which told her everything about why he was calling. "Victoria," he said without preamble, "I need to understand something about the Hendricks Avenue property." "What would you like to understand, David?" "Raymond Cho called me an hour ago asking me to transfer signature authority on the operating account to Damien directly away from the Sterling Blackwood Management Trust." A pause. "I just pulled the original trust documentation. Victoria, the trust requires your co-signature for any authority transfers. Raymond either doesn't know that or he's hoping I don't. Which do you think it is?" Another pause. Longer. "I think he knows," David said, "and I think he's hoping I'll process it quickly before anyone looks too hard." "Don't process it," Victoria said. "I wasn't going to." He was quiet for a moment. "How bad is this going to get?" "Unclear," Victoria said. "But I would recommend reviewing your exposure in any shared holdings before the end of the week." She could hear him exhaling slowly. "The Chicago situation," he said. "Is that connected?" She paused. "What do you know about the Chicago situation, David?" "Not much," he said. "Nothing I would want to say on this line." "Then review your exposure," she said. "And call your own attorney today." She hung up, but by noon, 4 more calls had come in. 2 were from business associates running versions of the same errand that David Reeves had described. Raymond Cho making rapid attempts to move assets, transfer authority, shift the structural landscape before anyone could stabilize it. One was from a woman named Patricia Hang at the Foundation Board, calling to ask carefully worded questions about the status of Victoria's directorship, and one was from a number Victoria didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, and then listened to it in her car with the engine running and the heat turned up. The voicemail was from a woman named Dr. Claire Lawson, who identified herself as the attending physician at New York Presbyterian, who had treated Victoria during her hospitalization 3 years ago. The message was short and precise and completely unexpected. "Ms. Blackwood, this is regarding a matter that's come to my attention that I believe you should know about. Please call me at your earliest convenience. It concerns your husband and certain communications he made during your care. I want to be careful about how I share this. Please call." Victoria sat in the car for a long time. Then she called Marcus. "The physician," Marcus said before she could speak. "I was going to tell you. How long have you known?" she asked. 2 days. "I got a separate inquiry through a contact I have at the hospital. Someone asking questions about whether Damien had ever tried to access your medical records during that period." Victoria stared through the windshield at the gray February street. A woman was pushing a stroller through the slush. 2 men in hard hats were eating sandwiches in front of a scaffolded building. Normal. Everything was completely normal. "He was asking about my prognosis," she said. "Not a question. That's my read," Marcus said. 3 years ago, you had an uncertain diagnosis for about 6 weeks before they cleared it. During that 6 weeks, there is reason to believe he was making preparations." "Preparations for what?" "For the contingency," Marcus said carefully, "in which you did not recover." She let that sit in the air between them. The slush outside had started to refreeze in the falling temperature, the surface going dull and crystalline. "He was going to let me die," she said. "I don't know that," Marcus said. "I know he was asking about your prognosis privately in a way that went around you. What he intended, he was measuring the situation." He wanted to know what his position would be, she said. Marcus said nothing. She called Dr. Lawson back. The conversation was 40 minutes long. When it ended, Victoria's hands were very steady, and her breathing was entirely controlled. And somewhere behind her sternum, there was a sensation that she did not have a precise word for. Something like the final lock of a structure clicking into place. Something like the last piece of evidence you gather that transforms a theory into fact. She drove back to the estate. She had a meeting at 3 with 2 attorneys she had retained 18 months ago through a firm that had no connection to any of Damien's associates. She had never told Damen about these attorneys. He didn't know their names. She was 41 minutes early. The attorneys were sisters, which Victoria had not known when she hired them, and which she had found, when she discovered it, quietly reassuring. Elena and Sophie Marchetti. Both Columbia law, 12 and 9 years of practice respectively, both with backgrounds in complex asset litigation, and both with reputations for a kind of sustained methodical pressure that opposing counsel found deeply uncomfortable. Elena was the older one, 46, dark-eyed and precise, with the manner of someone who prepared 3 times more thoroughly than she would ever need to be. Sophie was younger, but had the sharper instincts. The ability to read a room's architecture in moments. Together, they operated the way a pair of systems operates when they have been designed to complement each other. Victoria sat across from them in a conference room in a midtown building that had nothing on its exterior to indicate what happened inside. She laid out the previous 17 hours and approximately 8 minutes. Then she put a USB drive on the table. Everything from this point forward is on here, she said. 3 years of documentation, property transfers, trust structures, the holding company architecture, financial forensics on 6 of the partnerships, communications, and Dr. Lawson's testimony. Elena picked up the drive. She looked at it as if she were gauging its weight. The East Wing occupancy, she said. Trespassing, Sophie said almost simultaneously. Victoria looked at them. If the property is held in your trust and he has introduced occupants without your consent, Sophie said, the overnight occupancy constitutes trespass. We can have a notice delivered before 5 p.m. Not yet, Victoria said. I want them in the East Wing for now. I want Raymond Cho's consultant to keep reviewing those documents. Every minute he spends in that study is a minute spent in a building that belongs to me on a case that assumes facts that are not accurate. Elena set the drive down. You want them to commit, she said. I want them to build their strategy around a foundation that isn't there, Victoria said, and then I want to remove the foundation. The sisters exchanged a look that was brief and calibrated. When? Elena said. Victoria thought about Damen's face that morning, the real question beneath the performance. What are you going to do Thursday? She said. She drove home in the dark. The temperature had dropped further, and the streets were quiet in the specific way of cold nights in February. Foot traffic thinned to the few people who had somewhere necessary to be. She sat at a red light on Columbus and watched a man in a long coat walking a dog that was pulling hard against the leash, straining towards something in the shadows beyond the streetlight's reach. She thought about 12 years. 12 years of dinners and events, and the careful management of appearances. 12 years of standing in rooms where she didn't fully belong, and making herself useful, and making herself necessary, and making herself quietly indispensable to the architecture of someone else's life. She had told herself for a long time that she was doing this for reasons that made sense, that she was protecting something, that the patients had a purpose. She had been right about the patients. She had perhaps been less right about the purpose. The light changed. She drove. At home, the East Wing was lit. Through the tall windows on the second floor, she could see movement, a shadow passing across the light, steady and methodical. The consultant was still working. He had been at it for 9 hours. She wondered what he had found so far. What picture of the Blackwood finances was assembling itself behind those windows, and whether it matched the picture she already carried in her head? It wouldn't. That was the thing. His picture would be missing the pieces she held, and the pieces she held were the ones that changed what everything else meant. She parked. She went inside. Marcus met her in the entry. Raymond Cho called twice, he said. He wants to meet with you privately. He says it's urgent. Tell him Friday, Victoria said. He said it couldn't wait until Friday. Tell him Friday, she said again, and tell him to bring his own attorney. Marcus wrote it down. Vanessa Collins came out of the East Wing at 4 o'clock, he said. She stood in the East Corridor for about 10 minutes. I think she wanted to talk to someone. Then she went back. Victoria paused on the stairs. Is she eating? Marcus looked up from his notepad. She is pregnant, Victoria said. Make sure she has food. He nodded slowly. I will arrange it. She went upstairs. She changed out of her clothes and she sat on the bed. She let herself, for exactly 11 minutes, feel everything she had been not feeling since the moment she had pulled the ring off her finger. It was not pleasant. It was the particular grief of someone who had loved someone and then watched the thing they loved reveal itself as something else. Not transformed, but clarified. The original shape finally visible beneath all the layers of what she had chosen to believe. She had loved him once. That was real. The love had been real, even if he had not been, and the loss of it was a specific kind of wound that didn't care about preparation or documentation or legal strategy. She let herself have 11 minutes. Then she washed her face and went back to the desk. There were 14 messages to respond to. She responded to 12 of them. The other 2 could wait until Thursday because on Thursday, the accounts were going to freeze. The Property Management Authority was going to shift, and Raymond Cho's Chicago consultant was going to open a document on his laptop in the East Wing study that would tell him exactly who held title to the building he was sitting in, and it would not be the name he expected. Victoria opened the laptop. She began to type. Somewhere on the floor below her in the East Wing, she had decided not to reclaim yet. A man was building a legal strategy on the assumption that Damen Blackwood still owned everything. And in the quiet of the study, where she had spent 11 hours documenting the end of someone else's empire, Victoria Sterling Blackwood was doing something much more dangerous than fighting back. She was waiting, and then at 11:48, her phone rang. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer. But something, the instinct that had been sharpening itself for 3 years, the particular alertness of someone who has finally decided to stop protecting themselves from what they already know, made her pick up. The voice on the other end was male, careful, and entirely unfamiliar. Miss Sterling, it said, not Blackwood. Sterling, my name is Agent Frank Caruso. I am with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have been watching your husband's organization for 26 months. A brief pause. We would like to talk to you about what you know and about what you have. Victoria sat very still. I know quite a lot, she said. We believe you, he said. We also believe your husband knows we have been watching him, and we have reason to think that in the next 48 hours, he's going to move to neutralize any witnesses who witnesses, she said. Agent Caruso confirmed. That includes you, Miss Sterling, and potentially Dr. Lawson. Victoria looked at the laptop screen, at the documents open on it, at 12 years of work laid out in careful digital order. Every transaction, every communication, every piece of the architecture she had built while living inside the thing she was documenting. When do you want to meet? She said. Tonight, he said. Now, if possible. She stood up. She walked to the window. Below her, the East Wing was still lit, the shadow still moving. Give me an address, she said. She wrote it on the back of an envelope. She looked at it for 3 seconds. She put on her coat. The address Agent Caruso had given her was a parking garage on West 46th Street, the kind of place that existed in Midtown Manhattan as pure utility. Concrete and exhaust and the particular silence of a space designed for machines rather than people. 4th level D. She had driven herself, which Marcus had argued against in 3 different ways in the 2 minutes between her telling him she was leaving and her walking out the door. Let me come with you. No. Then let me send someone. No. Victoria, if I am not back by 2 a.m. call Elena Marchetti, she had said. You have the number. Tell her to open the package I left in the safe. Marcus had looked at her the way he sometimes did. Not with fear exactly, but with the particular expression of someone watching another person walk toward something they cannot be pulled back from. She drove. The garage was half empty at this hour, the upper levels essentially abandoned. The fluorescent lighting doing what fluorescent lighting always does in parking garages at midnight. creating the illusion of visibility while leaving everything that mattered in shadow. She parked where he had told her to park, and she sat in the car with the engine idling for 90 seconds, watching the rear-view mirror, watching the concrete pillars, watching the nothing that might be something. Then a man appeared from behind a support column 10 feet away. Late 40s, medium height, wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather, in a way that suggested he had come from somewhere warm in a hurry. He held up a badge as he walked toward her car. She rolled down the window. Miss Sterling. Frank Caruso had a face that had done a lot of things and remembered most of them. Square jaw, deep-set eyes, the permanent slight tension of someone who had spent decades operating in the space between what people showed and what they were. "Thank you for coming." "What is it you want me to know?" she said before he could continue. He looked at her for a beat. "Can we get out of the car?" "No." He accepted this without comment. He pulled his coat tighter and crouched slightly, so he was at eye level with the window. "Your husband has been under a federal financial crimes investigation since 2022, he said. "Wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges connected to a network of holding companies that have been funneling money for 3 separate criminal organizations. One of them is based in Chicago." Victoria said nothing. "We have him on wire," Caruso said. "We have him in rooms. We have documentation of financial flows that would be enough to indict on its own. But," he paused, "there is a problem." "There's always a problem," she said. "The problem is a man named Vincent Ryle." Something shifted in the back of her mind. The name was familiar in the way that names sometimes are. Not from direct encounter, but from peripheral awareness, the name spoken once in a context that hadn't seemed significant until now. "The Chicago consultant," she said. Caruso's eyes sharpened. "You know him." "I know he was introduced to me once under a different name, and that he arrived at my house last night with my husband and has been in my East Wing study for the past 12 hours. Caruso stood up straight. The temperature of the conversation changed. "Vincent Ryle is the financial architect of the Chicago operation," he said, and his voice had shifted to something flatter, something more careful. "He is not a consultant. He has been moving money through a series of shell companies for 8 years. And 3 of those shell companies have a documented financial relationship with your husband's holdings." He paused again, and in the pause she could hear him making a decision. "Miss Sterling, the reason I called you tonight, the reason this couldn't wait, is that we picked up communication this afternoon suggesting that Ryle came to New York not just to review your husband's finances. He came because someone told him that you might be a liability." Victoria looked at the concrete wall in front of the car. "A liability," she said. "You have documentation," Caruso said. 12 years of it, from what we understand. Your husband knows you have it. We believe he's known for at least 6 months and has been deciding how to handle it." He was watching her with the focused attention of someone who had delivered bad news to many people and was assessing in real time how this particular person was processing it. "Last night," Caruso said, bringing her to the house, the public display. The photographer's Raymond Cho brought with him. That wasn't just about humiliation. That was designed to force a reaction, to push you into doing something visible, something they could use. "To push me out of the house," she said, "and into the open." Caruso nodded. "Away from your security, away from your people, in an emotional state that would make you, in their calculation, more likely to make contact with attorneys, journalists, or investigators in a way they could monitor and preempt." Victoria sat with that. "How long have you known I had documentation?" she said. 6 weeks. "And you waited 6 weeks. We needed to know whose side it would land on," he said. "We needed to know if you were going to try to protect him or whether I was him," she said flatly. Caruso didn't flinch. "It is a question we have to ask." "And what's your current answer?" "Our current answer is that you have spent 3 years building a legal and financial architecture that is designed to separate you from his activities, protect yourself and specific third parties, and document misconduct in a form that would be useful to a legal proceeding." He looked at her steadily. "People who are trying to protect someone don't do that." She turned and looked at him through the window. "What do you need from me?" "Cooperation," he said, "and time. We need to move carefully. If Ryle believes you have made contact with federal investigators, we believe he will move to accelerate whatever Damien has planned. So, I go home, she said. You go home. You maintain the appearance of someone managing a personal situation. You do not signal anything unusual. I am managing a personal situation, she said. I know. I'm asking you to manage it in a way that doesn't put Dr. Lawson or Marcus Webb in a dangerous position. That landed. She felt it. 24 hours, Caruso said. Give us 24 hours to get an emergency protective order that will effectively freeze Ryle's ability to act on anything he finds in that study. After that, we'll be in a position to move openly. Victoria looked at her hands on the steering wheel. Damien knows you're watching him, she said. Yes. And he brought Ryle into my house anyway. Yes. That means he doesn't believe you have enough, she said, or he doesn't believe I will cooperate. Caruso said nothing. The silence confirmed it. 24 hours, she said. She rolled the window up and drove home. The east wing lights were still on when she arrived. 1:47 a.m. She went in through the side entrance. Marcus had left unlocked, and she went upstairs without going near the east corridor. She sat in the dark of the bedroom for a while, not thinking or thinking in the particular diffuse way that happens after a certain point of exhaustion, when the mind keeps moving but loses its sharp edges. Processing without deciding, turning things over without resolution. At some point, she slept. She woke at 6:15 to the sound of voices in the corridor below the bedroom. Not the east wing, the main corridor. She lay still and listened and identified Damen's voice and another one quieter. The particular clipped rhythm of the second voice identified it before she placed the speaker. Ryle. She rose. She did not dress. She stood at the bedroom door, and she could hear them more clearly now. The conversation carrying up the stairwell, the way sound does in old houses, through the architectural channels that the builders created without meaning to. The Hendricks Avenue account was locked by noon, Ryle was saying. His voice had the flat informational quality of someone accustomed to delivering bad news as pure data. The change of authority request was declined. The property management authority transfer also declined. She's been moving since last night. She is reacting, Damen said. She's scared. This is not a scared person, Ryle said. A scared person liquidates and runs. She is not liquidating anything. She is locking structure in place. A pause. Damien, I need you to understand something. I pulled the chain of title on the East 74th property last night. Silence. This house, Ryle said. This house is held in a trust, Sterling Family Holdings, LLC. It was transferred 14 months ago. Raymond processed the paperwork. More silence. Raymond processed it, Damen said, and his voice had gone flat in a way she had heard before. The particular flatness that preceded something she had spent years learning to diffuse and now had no interest in diffusing. Raymond processed it, Ryle said. Either he didn't understand what he was signing, or what, or he did. The silence that followed was long enough that Victoria began to wonder if they had moved. Then Damen's voice came again, very quiet. You're telling me I don't own my house. You own your stake in 8 other properties. The 5th Avenue unit, 3 commercial properties in Brooklyn. I am telling you this house, Damien said. This specific house. No, Ryle said. Your wife owns this house. She heard Damen sit down. The specific sound of someone dropping into a chair with their full weight when their body makes the decision before their mind does. She heard him breathe. Then she heard a sound she could not immediately identify. A low scraping and then glass. And she understood that he had swept something off a surface. Get Raymond on the phone, he said. It's 6:20 in the morning. Get him on the phone. She went to the bathroom. She turned on the shower. She stood under the water for a long time. Raymond Cho arrived at the house at 8 a.m. with the expression of a man who had driven across the city in the dark, preparing for a conversation he could not fully prepare for. Victoria was in the breakfast room. She heard him in the entry, heard him ask for Damien, heard Marcus's careful, neutral tone directing him to the east wing. She drank her coffee. At 8:40, Raymond appeared in the breakfast room doorway. He looked tired and something else. Something that on another man she might have called shaken. But Raymond Cho did not shake easily, so it presented instead as a kind of fundamental stillness, the stillness of someone who has realized the ground under their feet is different from what they thought it was. Victoria, he said. Raymond. He came in and sat across from her, which was the same choice Damien had made the previous morning. And she wondered if this was a strategy or just the instinct of men who had underestimated her and were revising that assessment in real time. I would like to explain the property transfers, he said. You don't need to explain them to me, she said. I know exactly what they are. I executed them. He stopped. I meant I would like to explain my role. She looked at him. Did you know what you were processing? Raymond Cho had been a corporate attorney for 28 years. He had a reputation for precision and for the careful management of professional ethics in circumstances that frequently tested them. She had always respected that about him in the abstract, in the way you respect qualities in someone you are opposed to. No, he said, not fully. And now I understand that I have spent the past 6 months processing documentation that your husband represented to me as routine restructuring, and that the documentation as executed has a different effect from the effect he described. Has a different effect, she said. Victoria, he leaned forward slightly. I have an obligation to my client, but I have a separate obligation that supersedes that. If I have been used to execute instruments that I was not properly informed about, then I have a problem that extends beyond Damien's interests. You have a bar problem, she said. Yes, he held her gaze. I wanted you to know that I became aware of the full picture late last night and that I have not yet communicated that awareness to Damien. She studied him. Why are you telling me this? Because Ryle is not here to manage finances, Raymond said, and his voice had dropped to something that was almost private. The kind of tone you use when you are aware of the acoustics of a room. He is here because Damon asked him to come before last week, before Vanessa. Ryle was coming regardless. He paused. I have been Damien's attorney for 11 years. I have managed a great deal of complexity in that time. What Ryle represents is not complexity. It's a different category of situation, and I am not willing to be in that room when it arrives. Victoria set down her coffee cup. Raymond, she said, are you telling me you want out? He looked at his hands. I am telling you that I am going to file a notice of withdrawal from Damien's representation this morning, citing irreconcilable conflicts. And I am telling you that before I do, I want you to know that whatever documentation I have that is relevant to your interests, I will make available through proper channels. She was quiet for a moment. You have 48 hours before the federal situation becomes visible, she said. Not a question. Raymond looked up at her sharply. She let him calculate what she knew and how she knew it. Yes, he said finally. Then file your withdrawal, she said, and call Sophie Marchetti. Tell her I referred you. She'll explain the proper channels. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. At the door, he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I don't think he ever understood what he had in you. I know, Victoria said. That was always the problem. Damien found her in the garden at 10 o'clock. The garden was not designed for February, but it was a summer thing. The beds bare and black with cold, the fountain turned off and covered. She stood near the stone wall with her hands in the pockets of her coat, and she watched him come across the dead grass. And she thought he looked for the first time in all the 14 years she had known him like someone who was losing. Not defeated, not broken, but losing, which is different. Losing has momentum to it, the awareness of direction, the sensation of the ground moving beneath you. Raymond is gone, he said. I know. You talked to him. You talked to me, she said. Damon stopped 2 feet away from her. He was not angry, which surprised her. Or he was something past anger, something that had moved through the heat of it and come out the other side as something colder and more considered. What do you want? He said. What do I want? She repeated. From this, from all of this. What is the outcome you're looking for? She looked at him, at the face she had known for 14 years. First as the face of someone she had believed in, and then as the face of someone she had been managing, and then for longer than she wanted to admit, as the face of something she had simply gotten used to. The gray at his temples, the lines the drinking had put in around his mouth, the eyes that were still sharp, still calculating, because Damen Blackwood's intelligence was real, even when everything else about him was constructed. I want my life back, she said. Your life back? He said. You mean I mean my actual life, she said. The one I stopped living around year 6 of this marriage when I realized what you were and decided to stay anyway because I convinced myself I had reasons. She looked at him without heat, without the tears he had counted on, with a clarity that she could feel in her chest like something structural. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted me to react. You brought Vanessa here as a weapon because you thought my pride would make me careless. He said nothing. I am not careless, she said. I never was. Victoria. Ryle is in my house, she said. You put him there. That tells me everything about what this week was supposed to be. She paused. How long has he been talking to the Chicago organization about me? Damen's expression went very still. I am going to ask you one more time, she said, and her voice did not rise, did not crack, did not give him anything he could use. How long has Vincent Ryle been in communication with whoever it is you owe in Chicago about how to manage the problem of your wife? Silence, Damien. He looked away. He looked at the dead garden. He looked at the stone wall and the city beyond it. And then he looked back at her with an expression that she understood was as close to honest as he had been in years. 3 months, he said. The cold came up through the ground and through the soles of her shoes, and she stood in it, and she breathed. And what was the plan? She said. It wasn't. He stopped, his jaw tightened. It wasn't what you're thinking. What I am thinking, she said, is that you were going to use the next 48 hours to move assets, compromise my legal standing, and place me in a position where I would either accept terms or face challenges from sources I couldn't respond to through normal channels. What I am thinking is that Ryle is not a financial consultant, and what I am thinking is that you told him about my documentation. Damien's face told her everything she needed. You told him, she said. The garden was very quiet. How much does he know? Enough, Damien said, and his voice had gone. He knows enough. Victoria looked at her husband for a long moment. The man who had walked into her home the night before with another woman on his arm and believed that the sight of it would break her. The man who had been managing a different problem for 3 months. The problem of what to do about his wife, who knew too much, who had been too patient, who had been quietly building a case while standing in the same rooms as him. She had thought the FBI call was the last piece of information she needed. She had been wrong. Ryle is going to move on whatever he found in that study, she said. Not in 48 hours. Today. She pulled out her phone. She called Caruso. He picked up on the first ring. He knows about the documentation, she said, and the timeline just changed. A pause on the other end. Then, how sure are you? She looked at Damien, who was standing in the frozen garden, watching her make the call that would end everything. Completely, she said. Behind her, inside the house, she heard the east wing door open. She heard footsteps on the stone floor of the corridor. She heard Ryle's flat, precise voice say one sentence to someone she couldn't see. And she heard in that sentence the name of the law firm where Elena and Sophie Marchetti worked. He had found it. He knew who her attorneys were. Caruso, she said, and her voice stayed level, stayed controlled, stayed exactly what it needed to be, even as everything accelerated around her. We need to move now, not tomorrow, right now. And across the dead garden. Damen Blackwood looked at his wife and understood for the first time, and entirely too late, that the woman standing in front of him had never been waiting for this moment. She had been ready for it. Caruso said 4 words before she could say anything else. Get out of there. Not a suggestion, not a procedural recommendation. The voice of someone who had just received information on a parallel channel that changed the geometry of the situation in a way he hadn't shared yet and wasn't going to explain on an open line. Now, he said, right now, don't take anything. Don't go back upstairs. Walk out the door you're closest to and get to your car. She looked at Damien. He was watching her with the expression of a man who understood that something had just shifted, but couldn't yet identify what. The expression of someone listening to one side of a conversation and running calculations on insufficient data. She hung up. Victoria Damen started. Don't, she said. She walked back across the dead garden toward the side door, the one she had used at 2 in the morning, the one that opened onto the staff parking area where her car was still sitting from the night before. She did not run. Running was information. She walked at the pace of a woman who had somewhere to be, not the pace of a woman who had just been told to leave her own house immediately. When she pushed through the side door and the cold air hit her, she kept walking, keys already in her hand, the muscle memory of 1,000 departures from 1,000 rooms where she had needed to leave without showing what leaving cost her. She got in the car. She started it. She pulled out of the parking area and onto the street, and she drove 2 blocks east and then pulled over and called Caruso back. "What happened?" she said. "Ryle made a call 40 minutes ago," Caruso said. "We were monitoring. He called a man named Gregor Sabo in Chicago. Sabo is the operational head of the organization Damien has been connected to. The call lasted 6 minutes, and Ryle told him about the Marchetti firm. He told him you had been building documentation for 3 years. He told him, a pause that was brief but loaded. He told him that you had been in contact with federal investigators." Victoria's hands were very still on the wheel. "How did he know that?" she said. The pause this time was longer. "We're looking into it," he said. "How did Vincent Ryle know that I had been in contact with federal investigators?" The silence on the line was the specific silence of a man who was choosing between 2 forms of honesty, the partial and the complete, and who had just made the decision. "There may be a communication problem on our end," Caruso said. "We are actively investigating. That's all I can tell you right now." She sat with that. A communication problem. The careful bureaucratic language of someone telling you that there is a leak without using the word, without saying the thing that changes everything, without giving you the sentence that makes the last 12 hours rearrange themselves into a shape you don't want to look at. Someone in Caruso's operation had told Ryle that she had made contact, which meant that when Caruso had called her last night, the blocked number, the parking garage, the 48 hours, some part of that operation had not been contained. "Am I still protected?" she said. "Yes," he said immediately, and she noted the immediacy. "Are my attorneys protected? We're sending agents to the Marchetti office now." "Marcus Webb?" "Yes." "Dr. Lawson?" "Yes, already done. She was contacted 20 minutes ago." Victoria looked at the street. A cab went by. A woman in scrubs was walking a bicycle along the sidewalk, head down against the cold. The normal world. Continuing, "Caruso," she said, "if someone in your operation communicated my contact to Ryle, then the documentation I have is now potentially known to Sabo's organization in Chicago, which means it's a target." "The documentation is digital," he said. "It's not only digital," she said. Another pause. "Tell me," he said. "There is a physical archive," she said. "Notarized documents, original signed instruments, Dr. Lawson's written testimony, 3 years of paper records. They are in a location that is not the house, not my attorney's office, and not any address connected to my name." She paused. "But if Ryle has been in that study for 15 hours with Damien's financial records, he may have found the reference." "What reference?" "There's a storage facility," she said. "The account is in my mother's name, Eleanor Sterling. It was set up while she was still living. It's the one piece of the architecture I never moved because I never believed she stopped. She had never believed Damien would actually come for her. That was the honest version. She had built every system, prepared every document, structured every trust and transfer and legal instrument with the precision of someone who expected to need it, and then at the deepest level, she had never fully believed she would. Because to believe it fully would have required believing that the man she had married was capable of something she was not willing to name. She was willing to name it now. "I need to get to that facility," she said. "I am sending 2 agents with you. They will be visible." "That's the point," he said. "Miss Sterling, don't go alone, please." She had the keys in her hand. She was already pulling back into traffic. "Tell them to meet me at the corner of West 34th and 10th, she said. 5 minutes. The storage facility was in a building in Chelsea that had been converted from a garment factory in the 90s. The kind of building that had kept its bones, wide floors, iron columns, ceilings high enough to feel industrial, while acquiring the civilian additions of climate control and security cameras, and the particular cleanliness of a place where people stored the things they couldn't throw away. Eleanor Sterling had taken out the account 12 years ago for her own reasons. Boxes of her husband's engineering documents and family records, and a set of her grandmother's furniture that no one wanted, but no one could bring themselves to sell. When Eleanor died, the account had passed to Victoria through the estate, and Victoria had quietly begun using it for a different purpose. The two agents Caruso had sent were a man and a woman, both young, both with the particular quality of people who had been trained to be less visible than they were, and who had not entirely mastered it. They met her at the corner as agreed, and they rode up in the freight elevator in silence, the woman agent watching the floor numbers, the man watching the door. The unit was on the 4th floor. Victoria had the combination memorized. She had never written it down. She opened the heavy door and reached for the light and stopped. The metal shelving unit that stood against the left wall, 4 shelves precisely organized. The kind of organization that is a personality trait rather than a system had been disturbed. Not ransacked, not destroyed. Disturbed in the careful way that someone who knew what they were looking for would disturb a space. 3 of the banker's boxes had been moved and replaced. Not in the wrong order, but not quite in the right order either. Close, but not identical to the arrangement she had left them in 8 months ago when she had last been here. The woman agent said, "Don't touch anything." Victoria was already looking at the shelf. The box labeled Correspondence 2019 was in its place. Property Records 2020 was in its place. The box she was looking for, unmarked, brown, sitting on the bottom shelf at the far right, was gone. Not gone. Wrong. It was on the 2nd shelf, not the bottom, and it was facing the wrong direction. The small adhesive label she had placed on the back of the box, now facing outward. She crossed the unit in 4 steps and pulled the box off the shelf and opened it. The Lawson file was there. The property trust documentation was there. The chain of title records were there. The communication archive was not. She stood holding the open box, and she understood what she was looking at. And she understood what it meant. And the understanding moved through her, not like shock, but like cold water. The kind of cold that is beyond sharp and becomes something else. Something that affects the quality of thought rather than replacing it. Someone had been here before her. Someone had been here, had known what to look for, had taken specifically the communication archive. 4 years of intercepted and documented communications between Damien and his partners. Communications she had obtained through methods she had never fully explained to anyone. The most legally complex and most operationally dangerous piece of the entire documentation, and they had left everything else. Not to clean the space, to send a message. They knew what the archive contained. They knew it was the most dangerous piece. They had taken it and left the rest to tell her that they had been here. That they knew that the advantage she had believed she held was no longer entirely hers. "Call Caruso," the mail agent said, already reaching for his phone. "I know," she said. Caruso arrived 40 minutes later with 2 more agents and a forensics technician who spent 20 minutes in the unit doing things with ultraviolet light and small brushes. Victoria watched from the corridor with the sensation of someone observing a scene in which they are simultaneously the central figure and completely irrelevant. Caruso came out to the corridor. He had the expression of a man who was managing several layers of a bad situation simultaneously and was choosing the order in which to address them. "It was recent," he said, "within the last 8 hours. Before I left the house," she said, "before you called me." "Yes." He looked at the unit door. "Which means someone knew about this location before last night," she said. This wasn't a response to what Ryle found in the study. This was already in motion. He nodded, not confirming exactly. "Processing the leak?" she said. "On your end, how long?" "I don't know," Caruso said. "I genuinely don't know," he said. And she believed him because his frustration was too specific and too unmanaged to be performed. "We are looking at internal communications from the last 72 hours. We have a short list. That's all I can tell you." "If your investigation has been compromised," she said, "then Sabo's organization has potentially had access to your operational timeline, which means they know your evidence. They know your witness list." She paused. "They know your case." He looked at her. "That's a worst case." "I'm interested in worst cases right now," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then there is something else I need to tell you. It's why I was going to call you this morning before you called me." She waited. "Last night after our meeting, I ran your husband's communications for the 48 hours preceding the events of Tuesday night. The Vanessa Collins arrival, the staged entrance. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper and held it out. This is a transcript of a call Damen made on Monday afternoon to a man named Lester Haynes. Haynes is an opposition researcher who has done work for several of Damien's associates. The call is 42 minutes long. She took the paper. She read the first 2 paragraphs. She stopped. She read them again. The cold in the corridor was the building's climate control, efficient and impersonal. But she felt it differently now. Felt it in the particular way that the body responds to information the mind hasn't fully processed yet. The physical recognition arriving before the cognitive one. He hired someone to investigate Marcus, she said. 6 months ago, Caruso said. Haynes ran a full background investigation. Financial history, personal relationships, communications. He paused, including his communications with you. She looked at the transcript, at the words she was reading, and the implication underneath them. Damien has a recording, she said. We believe so. Of Marcus and you. A phone call March of last year, in which you and Marcus Webb discussed the structure of the asset transfers and the purpose of the documentation you were building. Caruso's voice was careful, precise, the voice of someone delivering a diagnosis. If that recording is authentic and if it is presented in a certain context, it would look like conspiracy, he said. It would look like you were using Marcus to fraudulently transfer marital assets in a civil proceeding. Yes, he has been planning this for 6 months, she said. The words came out flat and informational, stripped of the thing underneath them. The thing that was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to it in the way that certain betrayals arrive not as new pain, but as the final verification of a fear you have been carrying for a very long time. The Vanessa situation, the staged entrance, Ryle in the house, none of that was reactive. This was built. Yes, Caruso said. He was ready for me to fight back, she said. He prepared for it. He wanted me to fight back because fighting back activates the recording. If the recording becomes part of a civil or criminal proceeding, I look like the aggressor. I look like someone who spent 3 years planning a fraudulent asset transfer and used a long-time employee as a mechanism. She set the transcript against the wall. She looked at the forensics technician through the open unit door and the empty space where the communication archive had been. Those are the documents that prove the transfers were defensive, that prove they were responses to documented misconduct. She looked at Caruso. Without the archive, the transfers look like exactly what he'll say they are. Caruso said nothing. He's not trying to win in court, she said. He is trying to make it impossible for me to win. He is trying to put me in a position where I spend the next 2 years defending myself against the very documentation I built to protect myself. And while I'm doing that, whatever he has left, whatever assets he has moved in the last 6 months goes somewhere I can't reach. She looked at the wall. She looked at the floor. She looked at the corridor light, fluorescent, institutional, humming at a frequency just below conscious hearing. Where's Marcus? She said. He has been contacted. He's safe. He doesn't know about the recording yet. I need to talk to him. Victoria, Caruso stepped forward slightly. Before you do, I need you to understand something about the next few hours. The situation has changed. The protection we can offer you is real, but it has limits. And some of those limits have just become more apparent. If you want to pull back, if you want to take what documentation remains and accept whatever settlement terms. No, she said. If you go forward, I know what goes forward, she said. She looked at him. I have known what goes forward for 3 years, she said. I built for what goes forward. I didn't build for losing the archive, and I didn't build for a recording, but I built for the principle of it. I built for the possibility that everything I prepared would be turned back against me, and I would have to be standing at the end of it with nothing except what I actually know and what I can actually prove. What do you actually have left? He said. She thought about Eleanor Sterling's storage unit and the 3 years of careful, documented, notarized, legally structured work that was sitting on those shelves minus 1 box. She thought about Raymond Cho and the notice of withdrawal he would have filed by now. She thought about David Reeves and his carefully worded call about the Hendricks Avenue account. She thought about Dr. Lawson and the 40-minute phone call and the written testimony that was still in the box on the shelf behind her. She thought about Vanessa Collins standing in the foyer 2 nights ago with one hand on her stomach and an expression that was trying to be defiant and mostly just looked scared. "Enough," she said. "Maybe, if I use it right." "That's not it's what I have," she said. "So it's what I am working with." She pulled out her phone. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight in the particular way it got when he was managing something he didn't want to alarm her with. "Where are you?" she said. "At the office. Sophie Marchetti called me." "Victoria, what?" "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth." A pause. "All right, the call we had last March," she said. "The one where we discussed the asset transfer structure. Do you remember it?" Silence. A silence that told her he remembered it. "He recorded it," she said. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a man understanding something about the last 6 months that had just reassembled itself around a detail he hadn't known was there. "Marcus," she said. "I remember the call," he said. His voice was careful, controlled. Marcus Webb had spent his adult life in rooms where things were being decided, and he had learned long ago to manage what his voice did in those rooms. "I remember exactly what we said. How bad is it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Out of context," he said, "without the documentation that explains why those transfers were made, without the archive, it's bad." "I know," she said. "Victoria," he said, and now his voice had something in it that she had not heard from Marcus Webb in 9 years of working together. Something that was not quite fear, but was whatever the competent, experienced version of fear sounds like. "He's going to use it to come after me. Not just as a witness, as a co-respondent." She closed her eyes. There it was, the actual shape of it. Damien's plan, complete and visible now that the last piece had been placed. Not just a legal strategy to complicate her position. A weapon designed to destroy the person who knew the most, who could testify most clearly, who was simultaneously her greatest operational asset and her most significant vulnerability. Marcus Webb had spent 9 years helping her build everything she had built. And Damien was going to use that to put Marcus in a room with a federal conspiracy charge and watch everything unravel. "Listen to me," she said. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't." "There is a man outside the office building," Marcus said. "He has been there for 40 minutes. I don't recognize him." She opened her eyes. "Caruso," she said, turning. "I need a protection detail at the Marchetti office building. Now." Caruso was already on his radio. "Marcus," she said, "stay on the phone with me. Don't go to the window. Don't go near the door." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She started moving toward the elevator. The 2 agents fell in behind her. She pressed the button and watched the numbers change. And she thought about what she had, and what she had lost, and what she needed to do in the next 4 hours to save the thing she had spent 3 years building from the inside of someone else's empire. She thought about Vanessa Collins, who had come out of the East Wing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon the day before and stood in the corridor for 10 minutes like someone who wanted to say something to someone and couldn't find the right door. She thought about what Vanessa knew, what Vanessa had been told, and what Vanessa had seen, and what Vanessa Collins, who had been promoted 3 times with Damien's assistance, and who had believed she was building a future, and who was 8 months pregnant and standing in a house that wasn't anyone's, might be missing. The elevator took 11 seconds to reach the ground floor, and Victoria spent every one of them thinking about Vanessa Collins. Not with anger. She had moved past anger the way you move past a landmark on a highway. It had been real, it had been there, and now it was behind her. And what mattered was what was ahead. She was thinking about Vanessa with the specific focused attention of a woman who had just lost her most critical piece of documentation and needed to find something that could replace it. And the only thing she could think of that might come close was a person. A person who had been in rooms with Damien. A person who had been told things, promised things, shown things. A person who was 8 months pregnant and standing in a house that was not what she had been told it was, involved with a man who had been doing to her in a different register and for different purposes. Exactly what he had been doing to Victoria for 12 years. Vanessa Collins had not known the full picture. Victoria believed that. She had believed it since Marcus had put the file on her desk 6 weeks ago. She had read it in full and understood that the promotions, the benefits, the professional trajectory that had seemed so meteoric were not the products of ambition, but of orchestration. Damien had been building Vanessa into a position using his network, using his money, using the same infrastructure he used for everything. And Vanessa had believed she was getting there herself. What Damien needed Vanessa for was never what he had told her. Victoria walked out of the building into the cold, and she said to the mail agent, whose name she had learned was Decker, "I need to go back to the house." Decker looked at the female agent, whose name was Reyes. Something passed between them that was fast and professional and ended with Reyes on the phone. "Caruso needs to authorize that," Decker said. "Caruso will authorize it," Victoria said. "Call him." He called him. She stood on the Chelsea sidewalk in the February cold, and she watched the street and she thought about the shape of what she still had. The property trust documentation was intact. The chain of title records were intact. Dr. Lawson's testimony was intact. Raymond Cho was now a withdrawn attorney who had communicated his willingness to make relevant documentation available through proper channels. David Reeves had declined to process Damien's authority transfer and had called his own attorney. The Marchetti firm had Damien's asset structure mapped in sufficient detail to construct a civil case. What she had lost was the communications archive. 4 years of intercepted internal communications that would have been the cleanest, most direct evidence of criminal conspiracy. What Damen had was a recording that out of context made her look like the architect of a fraudulent asset transfer. What neither of them had yet was Vanessa. Decker put the phone back in his pocket. "Caruso says yes, but we're with you." "Understood," she said. The house looked different in the flat gray February light of mid-morning than it did at night. More like itself, somehow less theatrical. Just a large building on a Manhattan street that happened to cost $12 million and happened to contain 4 people who were now in various stages of understanding that they were standing on ground that was dissolving under them. Victoria walked in through the front door, her front door. She walked without hesitating, without looking at the entry table where the ring still sat because no one had moved it. She went directly to the East Wing corridor and knocked twice on the door of the guest suite. Silence, then movement. Then Vanessa Collins opened the door. She looked like she hadn't slept. The camel coat was gone, and she was wearing a loose, dark dress, and her hair was down, and there were shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with pregnancy fatigue. She looked at Victoria, then at Decker and Reyes standing 6 feet back, and her face went through 3 or 4 things very quickly, before settling on the particular careful blankness of someone trying not to show how frightened they are. "I need to talk to you," Victoria said. "I don't think Damien is not here," Victoria said. "Ryle is not here. I am not asking you for anything that will hurt you. I am asking for 20 minutes. Vanessa looked at her, at the agents behind her, at the corridor, the house, the situation she was standing in. "Come in," she said. The East Wing guest suite had been decorated by an interior designer Damien had hired 4 years ago, with a brief that amounted to expensive and European, and it showed. Dark wood, heavy drapes. Furniture that was beautiful and slightly uncomfortable in the way of furniture selected for appearance rather than use. Vanessa sat in the armchair nearest the window. Victoria sat across from her. Decker and Reyes stayed in the corridor. "How much did he tell you?" Victoria said. "Not hostile, direct." Vanessa looked at her hands. "About you? About what he was planning? About why he wanted you here in this specific house this week?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "He said he wanted to be honest with both of us. He said he wanted to start something real with the baby coming, and that meant being direct. He said that. He said you had grown apart." Vanessa looked up. Her eyes were dark and steady and very tired. "He said it was mutual, and you believed him." She stopped. She looked at the window. Outside, a pigeon was sitting on the ledge with the particular stillness of pigeons in cold weather, completely indifferent to everything happening inside the glass. "I believed some of it," she said. "I had reasons to believe some of it." "Your promotions," Victoria said. Vanessa's expression shifted. Something behind it went very still. "I know about the reviews," Victoria said. I know about the Hartwell Group position and the salary structure and the performance evaluations that had his signature in the supporting chain of correspondence. She kept her voice level, informational. She was not here to humiliate Vanessa Collins. She was here because Vanessa Collins was a witness. He built your career. He built it because he needed you to be credible enough to use in a boardroom, in a legal filing, as the mother of his child in a custody structure he is already planning. Vanessa looked at her. He is going to use this pregnancy, Victoria said, to establish a claim on assets that were never genuinely his. The child, your child, is going to be used as a legal mechanism. That's what Ryle is doing in this house. That's what the Chicago organization needs the child for. An heir changes the inheritance structure. It changes the challenge process on the trusts. It gives Damien a standing he doesn't currently have. The silence in the room was very complete. The child is leverage, Vanessa said. Her voice was flat, not a question. The child is leverage, Victoria said. I'm sorry. Vanessa pressed both hands against her stomach and looked at the window, and her breathing changed, became something more effortful. Victoria watched her and said nothing, and gave her the second she needed. What do you want from me? Vanessa said finally. Her voice was different now, stripped of the defensive layer. Underneath it was something younger and something harder, and something that had been sitting there for a while, Victoria thought, waiting for someone to say out loud the thing Vanessa had been almost knowing for months. Whatever he told you, Victoria said. Whatever he showed you, whatever promises he made in writing or in rooms where other people were present. I need it. Vanessa looked at her. And then what? And then you are not part of this, Victoria said. You and your child are protected. I have a trust structure already in place that can be amended within 48 hours to include provisions for your child that Damien cannot touch and that have nothing to do with his assets or mine. Your child has a future that isn't contingent on how this ends for him. You do that? Vanessa said. For my child, not for your child. Victoria said, for the child, who did not choose any of this, and who is going to arrive in a situation that is already a disaster, and who deserves at least one person in the room making a decision that isn't about power. Vanessa stared at her for a long moment. Then she stood with the careful, deliberate movement of someone navigating the last weeks of pregnancy. And she crossed the room to the heavy dresser against the far wall, and she opened the bottom drawer, and she took out a manila envelope, and she held it out. He sent these to me before I knew about you, she said. Letters, a legal agreement we signed in November. He was very specific about what he wanted in writing. Her jaw tightened. I kept everything because I'm not stupid. I kept everything because something felt wrong, and I didn't know what, and I thought if it went wrong, I would need it. You are not stupid, Victoria said. She took the envelope. You were given a very curated picture by someone who is very good at curated pictures. Vanessa sat back down. She looked at the floor. Is he dangerous? She said. Not the house, not the legal situation. She meant physically. Victoria heard it. Not to you, Victoria said. Not while I am moving. And you are going to the Marchetti office today with those agents in the corridor, and you are going to stay there until this is over. Vanessa nodded, one sharp movement. The movement of someone who has made a decision and is already moving past the making of it. Victoria was in the corridor with the envelope in her hand when her phone went off. Marcus, she answered before the second vibration. He is here, Marcus said. Ryle, Damien. He came to the office. He's in the lobby. He's asking for me by name. Her stomach tightened. Don't go down. I'm not going down. But Victoria, a sound in the background. The particular acoustic quality of an office building's lobby on speakerphone. He's not alone. There are 3 men with him. I don't recognize any of them. Caruso. She was already turning toward Decker. Get Caruso on the line right now. Decker had his phone out. Marcus, stay on the line with me, she said. Stay away from the elevator and away from the stairs. Is Sophie Marchetti with you? Elena. Sophie is in court. Stay with Elena. Lock the office door. She heard the lock click and felt something in her chest loosen by exactly 1 degree. Marcus, the agents Caruso sent. Where are they? One is in the lobby. I can see him on the security feed. He's approached Damien. They're talking. A pause. Damien is showing him something. A document. Decker said, Caruso, now. He held the phone out. Caruso, she said. I see it, Caruso said. He sounded like a man who was in a room with a lot of screens and was moving fast. He has a court order, emergency civil filing. It was submitted at 8 o'clock this morning before any of our protective orders were in place. It names Marcus Webb as a co-respondent in a fraudulent asset transfer claim, and it authorizes what? She said. Document seizure, Caruso said. Any documents in Marcus Webb's possession related to the Sterling Blackwood estate holdings. She understood the entire architecture of it in the space of one breath. Damien had filed at 8 in the morning before the FBI's protective orders, before Raymond's withdrawal was processed, before any of the protective legal structure she had been building with the Marchetti firm had been filed and stamped and made real. He had filed in the narrow window between her leaving the house and the federal machinery beginning to move, and he had named Marcus, and the court order gave him the right to walk into that building and take everything Marcus had. Can you stop it? She said. Potentially, but I need 20 minutes to get the counter order in front of a judge. And I need he's moving now, Marcus said. He's coming toward the elevator. 20 minutes, she said to Caruso. I need 20. You have 10, he said. She hung up on Caruso. Decker, can your agent in that lobby physically delay Damen Blackwood from entering that elevator for 10 minutes without exceeding his authority? Decker's eyes moved. I can tell him to try. Tell him to try. Decker was on the radio. She stood in the corridor of her east wing with Vanessa Collins's envelope in her inside pocket, and she thought with the clarity of someone who has been awake for 30 hours and has burned through every reserve except the one that doesn't have a name, the one that is past adrenaline and past fear, and is simply the bedrock of a person, the thing underneath everything else. Then she started walking toward the front door. Where are you going? Decker said. To the Marchetti office. Victoria, he's not doing this to Marcus, she said. He is not doing this to Marcus in a building lobby in front of people. Not today. She was in the car before Decker finished his sentence. She heard him swearing behind her and heard him getting into the second vehicle. She pulled out of the drive and into the street, and she drove because the Marchetti office was 8 blocks away, and 8 blocks in Manhattan in midday traffic was 12 minutes, and she had 10, and she drove like someone who understood the arithmetic of the situation completely. Her phone was ringing. Caruso. She answered it on the hands-free. I have a judge, he said. I need 4 more minutes. You have 4, she said. She went through a yellow light that was more red than yellow. The cab behind her honked. She didn't hear it. The filing this morning, she said. The attorney of record on Damien's side. Who is it? I don't have that in front of me, Caruso said. Her voice was very flat. Raymond Cho withdrew this morning. Damen has been without his primary attorney since approximately 8:15 a.m. The filing was submitted at 8, which means it was submitted by whoever replaced Raymond between the time Raymond communicated his withdrawal and 8 o'clock a.m., Caruso said. And she could hear him getting there, running the same calculation. Who replaced him that fast, she said. A pause. Sabo, Caruso said. Not directly, but an attorney connected to Sabo's network in New York. We have a name. File it, she said. File the connection between Sabo and Damien's new legal representation in the counter order right now. If that connection is on record when the judge reviews the counter order, it changes the context of the entire civil filing. Caruso said, it connects the civil action to the federal investigation. She heard him moving, heard other voices in the background. Give me 3 minutes. She was 2 blocks from the Marchetti office. She could see it from here. A glass and steel building, mid-rise, unremarkable from the outside. And in its lobby, if the security feed was still showing what Marcus had described, her husband and 3 men she didn't know, and 1 FBI agent trying to hold a line with 10 minutes of authority and counting down. She parked in a loading zone. She got out of the car. She was walking fast, not running. Heels on the pavement, the cold air hitting her face, and the envelope in her inside pocket and her phone in her hand. Every system in her body running at the particular pitch of someone who is not afraid because they are too far past it. Because fear requires a future that is uncertain, and Victoria Sterling had decided what her future was going to be. She pushed through the glass door of the lobby. Damen turned. He was standing at the elevator bank with two of the three men she didn't recognize, and the FBI agent Caruso had sent. A young man whose name she didn't know was standing with his body between Damien and the elevator call button in the specific posture of someone executing a delay with maximum professional commitment. The third man was near the door, and he moved when she came in, and she walked past him as if he weren't there. Damen looked at her. His face moved through surprise, and then through something colder and more prepared. The expression of someone who has rehearsed for this exact moment and is now deciding which version of it this is. "Victoria," he said. "Damien," she said. The lobby was not empty. A woman at the reception desk had gone very still. Two people near the elevators had stopped moving. The particular suspended quality of a space where something is happening that everyone present can feel, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge. "You need to leave," she said. "I have a court order," he said. He held it up. "This is legal. This is processed. This is your attorney of record. On that filing is a man with documented financial connections to a federal criminal investigation," she said. Her voice carried in the lobby, clean and level and absolutely clear. "The connection is being filed with a federal judge in approximately 2 minutes. When it is filed, the court order you're holding becomes evidence in a federal proceeding, and any action taken under it becomes obstruction." The two men behind him exchanged a look. Damen stared at her. "You came here to take Marcus's files," she said. "You came here because you thought you had a 2-hour window before the federal structure closed around you. And you were going to use that window to take the last piece of documentation that ties the Chicago money to your accounts." She stepped closer, 2 feet, close enough to see the muscle in his jaw. "You don't have a 2-hour window. You have about 90 seconds before Caruso files that connection, and this lobby becomes part of a federal obstruction record." Damen's face was doing something she had not seen it do in 12 years of looking at it. Something that was past the calculation, past the performance, past the constructed confidence of a man who had spent decades making rooms arrange themselves around him. It was breaking, not dramatically, not visibly to the woman at the reception desk or the strangers near the elevators, but to Victoria, who had studied this face through 12 years of every version it was capable of. The charming version, the dangerous version, the version that appeared at 3 o'clock in the morning when he thought she was asleep and was simply himself. To Victoria, it was completely visible. He was afraid. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. One word from Caruso. Filed. She looked back at Damien. "It's done," she said. He looked at the court order in his hand, at the lobby, at the men behind him who were already recalculating, already reassessing what being in this building meant for them now that the legal ground under the entire operation had just shifted. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was low, almost private, the way it used to be when they were alone, before she had learned that private didn't mean honest. "Yes, it is," she said. "You just don't know it yet." One of the men behind him said something she couldn't hear, and Damen turned and looked at him. Something passed between them that was fast and conclusive, and then Damien turned back to Victoria one more time, with an expression she would think about later in the quiet of whatever came after this. An expression that was complex and human, and for 1/2 second was nothing but the face of a man who understood what he had lost. Not the assets, not the empire, but something else. Something he had thrown away in a ballroom entrance with a camel coat and a staged humiliation and the particular arrogance of a person who had never genuinely believed the person standing across from them was his equal. Damien left the lobby, not with dignity, not with the controlled exit of a man who has decided to retreat strategically and will return on better terms. He left the way water leaves a space when the structure containing it fails. Not a decision exactly, more like a physical consequence of pressure finding its release. One of the men with him said something low and urgent near his ear, and Damien turned and walked toward the glass door and through it. Victoria stood in the lobby and watched him go and did not move until the black SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the stream of midday traffic. Then she leaned against the wall, not for long, maybe 4 seconds. The marble was cold through her coat, and the lobby had begun to resume its normal sounds around her. The woman at the reception desk, clearing her throat, someone's phone ringing, the elevator arriving with a soft bell. Victoria pressed her shoulders against the wall and breathed and let those 4 seconds be what they were, which was the first 4 seconds in approximately 31 hours that she was not actively managing something. Then she stood straight. She went upstairs. Elena Marchetti had aged approximately 3 years since Victoria had last seen her 2 days ago. She was standing at the window of her office when Victoria came in, her jacket off, her arms crossed, and she turned with the expression of someone who had just watched a very dangerous thing happen from a very close distance and was still integrating it. "Your counterorder is on record," she said. "The connection to Sabo's network is filed. Damen's civil action is effectively frozen pending the federal court's review of the overlap." Victoria sat down. Her body made the decision and she let it. "The recording," she said. "We have the recording," Elena said. "Caruso sent it through 40 minutes ago. I have reviewed the relevant section." She came away from the window and sat across from Victoria. "It's what we thought. Without the communication archive, it reads as conspiratorial in isolation. With the full context of the asset transfers, the documentation we have in the trust records, the chain of title, the Lawson testimony, the Cho withdrawal, it becomes something else entirely. Defensive restructuring," Victoria said. "Documented response to documented misconduct," Elena said, "which is what it was. We can make that case. It will not be fast, and it will not be simple, and there will be months where it is very uncomfortable, but we can make it." Victoria looked at the window, at the gray February sky above the Manhattan roofline, at the city that had absorbed her arrival 20 years ago and had never once asked her what it had cost. "The archive," she said. "What they took." Elena was quiet for a moment. "We may not need it," she said carefully. "With the federal investigation moving openly now, the communications Caruso's team has gathered independently over 26 months may effectively replace what was in those boxes. The federal record is actually more legally clean than your private collection would have been." "I know that," Victoria said. "I know it intellectually." She paused. "It was my mother's storage unit. Eleanor kept her husband's engineering drawings in there, her grandmother's furniture." Elena said nothing. She waited the way a good attorney waits, with complete stillness and zero pressure. "Someone went into my mother's storage unit," Victoria said, "and took 3 years of my work. And I want you to know that I understand it is replaceable, that the case proceeds, that the loss is manageable, and I also want you to know that it is the thing from this entire week that I am going to be angry about for a very long time." "That's appropriate," Elena said quietly. "Yes," Victoria said, "it is." She stood. She thought for a moment. "Vanessa Collins is coming to you today. Treat her as a cooperative witness, not an adversary. She has letters and a signed agreement from November. Review them and tell me tonight what we are working with." "Already scheduled," Elena said. "Sophie is handling it." Victoria nodded. She picked up her coat. "Victoria," Elena said, "go sleep. We have this for the next 12 hours. Victoria looked at her, at the organized competence of the office, the stacked files, the yellow legal pads with their dense handwriting, the 2 paralegals visible through the glass wall, who were already moving with the specific focused velocity of people who know exactly what they are doing and why it matters. "I will," she said, "after one more thing." The one more thing was Marcus. She found him in the small conference room at the end of the corridor, sitting with both hands around a coffee cup that had gone cold, staring at the table with the expression of a man who has spent several hours inside a very unpleasant understanding of his own position. He looked up when she came in, and something moved through his face that was complicated and unguarded in a way Marcus Webb rarely allowed. She sat across from him. "I should have told you about the recording risk," she said. "You didn't know," he said. "I suspected the call in March. I knew it was an unusual level of detail for a phone conversation. I knew he monitored the house lines." She looked at him. "I told myself it wasn't enough to worry you about." Marcus looked at his hands. "I told Elena everything this morning. Every call, every meeting, every decision I was part of. The full record." He looked up. "I have been doing this for 9 years. Everything I did was documented and legal and in service of protecting your position. I know that. But if a prosecutor, there will be no prosecution of you," Victoria said. The federal investigation's target is Damien and Ryle and the Sabo organization. Caruso confirmed this morning that you are classified as a cooperating witness, not a subject. He could have told me that 2 hours ago, Marcus said, and there was something briefly wry in his voice, the first thread of his ordinary manner surfacing through the exhaustion. He should have, Victoria said. I will tell him you said so. Marcus almost smiled. Then it faded, and he looked at his cold coffee, and he was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing whether to say the thing they are thinking or absorb it privately. I am sorry, he said, that it went this far. Marcus, I knew 6 months ago that the situation was accelerating, she said. I had signals. I should have pushed harder. You pushed exactly as hard as I allowed you to push, she said. The decisions were mine. The consequences are yours too, he said. That's the part that. He stopped. 9 years, Victoria. I have been in this with you for 9 years, and I watched you hold this together, and I watched you manage what he was, and I watched you build the exit while living inside the situation, and I. His voice did something briefly that he controlled immediately. I wanted it to cost him more than it's going to cost him. She looked at him for a long moment. It is going to cost him everything, she said. It is just going to take longer than today. I know, he said. I know it in my head. He tapped his chest once briefly. Less so here, I know, she said. She put her hand over his for 3 seconds, and then she stood up. And he stood up, and they looked at each other across the conference table with the particular understanding of two people who have been through something that will never fully fit inside ordinary language. And then Marcus said, go sleep. And Victoria said, that's what Elena said. And Marcus said, Elena is right. And Victoria left. She did not go home. The house on West 74th Street, her house, the house in the trust, the house where all of this had begun 48 hours ago with a ring placed on a marble table, was still technically occupied by Ryle's team. And while Caruso's people were now present on the premises in sufficient force to manage the situation, Victoria was not ready to walk back through that door tonight. She was not ready for the East Wing lights, the entry table, the marble and golden crown, molding of a life she had been living inside for 12 years. She went to a hotel, a quiet one, not far, nothing dramatic. A room on the 14th floor, with a window facing north and clean sheets, and the specific silence of a space that belongs to no one in particular. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she did the thing she had been refusing to do for 31 hours. And she let herself feel the full weight of what the week had been. It was not what she expected. She had been braced for grief, for the particular devastation of a long ending, for the accumulated cost of 12 years arriving all at once. What came instead was something quieter and more ambiguous. Not relief quite, not peace, because the situation was not resolved and would not be resolved for months or possibly years. And there would be courtrooms and depositions, and the grinding institutional machinery of federal prosecution and civil litigation, and all the forms that aftermath takes when the life involved was as structurally complex as hers had been. But underneath all of it, underneath the machinery and the exhaustion, and the specific ache of what Marcus had said in that conference room, it's going to cost him everything. It's just going to take longer than today. Underneath all of it was something she recognized as herself. She was still here. Not the version of herself that had managed Damien's world and protected Damien's image and quietly documented Damien's crimes while standing in his rooms and eating at his table and wearing his ring. The version underneath that one. The version that had driven to Dayton for Eleanor's funeral and sat in her mother's kitchen and held Eleanor's hands and understood with complete clarity that what Eleanor had given her was not money, not connections, not the name or the reputation, but the capacity to hold multiple complex systems in place simultaneously without losing a single thread. She had not lost the thread. She lay down on the hotel bed without taking off her shoes, and she looked at the ceiling and she was asleep in 4 minutes. The proceedings that followed did not move quickly because nothing in the intersection of federal criminal law and complex civil asset litigation moves quickly. And anyone who has lived through it will tell you that the waiting is its own particular punishment. Different from the acute pain of crisis, but in some ways more wearing. the way a low, persistent sound is harder to endure than a single loud one. The federal indictment against Damen Blackwood came down 11 weeks after the night Victoria had stood in a parking garage on West 46th Street and answered a call from a blocked number: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. The Sabo organization's connection to Damien's holdings was laid out in a federal complaint that was 47 pages long and which Victoria read in full in Elena Marchetti's office on a Tuesday afternoon in May, sitting at the conference table with a cup of coffee that she actually managed to finish while it was still warm. Vincent Riel was indicted separately the same day. He had left New York 6 days after the lobby confrontation, which Caruso had known and allowed because Riel leaving established a flight pattern that was useful to the federal case. He was detained in Miami 3 weeks later. Raymond chose withdrawal and cooperation offered through proper channels, as he had described to Victoria in the breakfast room, provided the federal investigation with documentation of several financial transactions that Damien had represented to Raymond as routine, and which the federal case revealed as anything but. Raymond faced a bar inquiry. He kept his license narrowly and moved to a smaller firm in New Jersey where he took on cases of the kind that did not require him to be in rooms where things were being decided. Victoria did not know if this was punishment or relief for him, and did not spend significant time wondering about it. Gregor Sabo's organization, in Chicago, was the larger target and the longer fight. The kind of federal investigation that would consume years and produce eventual convictions that were satisfying on paper and exhausting in the living of them. Victoria cooperated fully. She gave depositions that lasted 2 days, and then another day, and parts of a third day, in a conference room that had no windows across a table from federal attorneys, who asked the same questions in slightly different configurations to see if the answers changed. They did not change. Victoria Sterling was not a person whose answers changed under pressure. The civil litigation, which was simultaneous and therefore doubly grinding, moved through its phases with the methodical velocity that the Marchetti sisters applied to everything. The recording Damen had made of her call with Marcus was entered into evidence and then contextualized within the full documentation of the asset transfers, and what had been designed to make Victoria look like a fraudulent conspirator became in context exactly what she had said it was. A woman documenting her exit from a dangerous situation conducted with complete legality. Every instrument notarized, every transfer recorded, every decision made in response to something that could be proven to have happened. The communication archive that had been taken from Eleanor's storage unit was never recovered. This was the loss Victoria had predicted it would be. Manageable, replaceable in practical terms. Irreplaceable in the terms of what it represented, which was 4 years of her own work, stored in a space her mother had opened. She had grieved it properly, which meant she had been angry about it in private for several weeks, and had then set the anger in the particular compartment where she kept things that were finished. The east wing of the house on West 74th Street stood empty from March until the following autumn when the transition began. Vanessa Collins's son was born in April. He was healthy and he was loud, and he arrived into a situation that was objectively a disaster and did not appear to know or care, which Victoria found, when Marcus told her about the birth, unexpectedly moving. His name was Samuel. He had dark hair like his father and dark eyes that Vanessa said were hers. Victoria's amended trust provisions for Samuel Blackwood Collins were processed and finalized 6 days after his birth. They were structured such that the funds would be available to him at 18 for education and at 25 without restriction, held in a clean, separate entity that no one could touch. Not Damien, not the federal proceedings, not the civil litigation, not any future version of any of the complicated adult lives of the people who had created, and then complicated, and then tried to dismantle the world he had been born into. He would not know where the money came from until he was old enough to understand the story. And maybe by then, the story would have acquired the distance that stories need before they become something other than wounds. Vanessa had cooperated fully. The letters and the November agreement she had kept in the bottom drawer of the East Wing dresser provided the civil case, with documentation of Damien's promises to her regarding asset transfers. This had the effect, once processed by the Marchetti firm, of demonstrating that Damien had been attempting to direct marital assets toward a private arrangement without Victoria's knowledge or consent well before the staged confrontation at the door. The agreement Vanessa had signed in November had been represented to her as a private commitment between herself and Damien. What it actually was legally was a document Damien had intended to use to establish Vanessa's claim on assets that he had planned to have transferred away from Victoria's trust by the time the claim was active. Vanessa had not known this. Victoria had always believed she had not known this. The belief was confirmed in a deposition that Vanessa gave in June. Sitting across the table from the same federal attorneys 8 weeks postpartum, with the particular focused calm of someone who has been frightened and is no longer frightened, and has decided that the most useful thing left to do with everything she has been through is to say it clearly and let the record show. Victoria and Vanessa never became friends. That was not what this was. But they reached over the months that followed a functional and honest relationship of the kind that is only possible between people who have been on opposite sides of the same disaster and have both come out of it. Understanding that the disaster was not of either of their making, they communicated through attorneys primarily and occasionally directly. And once in October, they had coffee in a small place near the Marchetti office that Vanessa had suggested, and Victoria had agreed to without fully knowing why. They talked for 2 hours, not about Damien, mostly. About Vanessa's new position at a different firm, the one she had found entirely on her own merits, and which paid less than the orchestrated trajectory Damien had constructed for her, but which felt, she said, like hers. About Samuel and the particular exhausted clarity that Victoria had heard from other new mothers. The sense of a world reorganized around something undeniable and immediate. About what it meant to look back at a period of your life and understand that you had been someone's instrument without knowing it, and the specific work of separating the things you actually wanted from the things that had been curated to make you feel like wanting them. "Do you hate him?" Vanessa asked. It was the kind of question you can only ask someone who has earned the right to be asked it. Victoria thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. "No," she said. "I did for a while somewhere around week 4, and then it ran out." She looked at her coffee. "Hate requires a certain amount of continued investment. You have to keep giving the person your attention. I got tired of giving him my attention." Vanessa looked at the window for a moment. "I think I am still in week 4, she said. "That's appropriate," Victoria said. "Samuel is 6 months old." Vanessa almost laughed. The almost was enough. The house transformation was Marcus's project, practically speaking, though it had been Victoria's decision, and the Marchetti firm had handled the legal restructuring of the property from private residence to operational foundation headquarters. The Sterling Leadership Foundation had been registered and funded before the end of the summer. Its purpose was specific. Young women from working-class families, first-generation professionals, careers in law and finance and business. The latter that Victoria had climbed in part on the strength of a scholarship and a mother with a particular kind of mind, and the capacity to hold multiple systems in place simultaneously without losing a single thread. The East Wing became residential housing for 8 scholarship recipients per year. The rooms Damien had ordered prepared for his mistress were repainted a deep warm cream and fitted with proper bookshelves and desks built for actual use rather than appearance. And in September, the first 8 residents moved in with their laptops and their box sets, and their particular combination of ambition and weariness that Victoria recognized from a version of herself she had not thought about in a long time. She walked through the East Wing on the first day the residents arrived, and she did not perform anything about it. No speech, no narrative, no framing of the space as the site of something overcome. She introduced herself to each of them by her first name and asked what they were studying and remembered the answers. That was all. The building would mean what it meant over time. Accumulation of use and work and small daily acts of people becoming who they were going to be. and that meaning did not require her to provide it in advance. Marcus ran the foundation operations with the same thoroughness he had brought to the estate for 9 years, which was to say with a precision that looked effortless from the outside, and was the product of sustained and invisible labor. He had declined 3 offers to move to other organizations during the months of the litigation, which Victoria had not expected him to decline, and which he had declined when she asked him about it with the brevity of the man who had decided something and did not require it to be discussed. "I started this with you," he said. "I will finish this with you." "It's not finished," she said. "The bad part is finished." He said I meant the rest of it. The sentencing phase of the federal case came in the following February. Exactly 1 year after the night Damen Blackwood had walked through the front door of the house on West 74th Street with Vanessa Collins on his arm and the absolute certainty that the woman who lived there would break. Victoria did not attend the sentencing. She had been present for what she needed to be present for: the depositions, the civil proceedings, the hours in rooms with no windows answering questions that circled the same territory from different angles. She had done her part, and she did not need to watch the formal conclusion of it to know what the conclusion meant. She was in the East Wing study when Caruso called. The study she had taken over from the Foundation's administrative offices, a room with good light and a view of the garden which she had replanted in the autumn, with the assistance of one of the residents who turned out to have a background in horticulture and who had very strong opinions about what should replace the ornamental beds, and which Victoria had deferred to entirely. 7 years, Caruso said. Federal plus the civil judgments. She looked at the garden through the window. The beds were bare in February again, the same bare black soil as the year before, but different. Planted with intention now, waiting for spring in the purposeful way of something that will return. "Thank you," she said. "You did most of it," he said. "We did it," she said. "Your leak problem cost us 3 weeks and the communication archive and a significant amount of my composure." A pause, and then Caruso did something she had not expected from him. He laughed briefly and genuinely, the laugh of a man who has been in a long and grinding thing and has come out the other end still standing. "The leak resigned," he said quietly. "It was handled." "Good," she said. She hung up. She set the phone on the desk. She looked at the garden. 1 year. In 1 year, the room had gone from a space where Vincent Ryle had spent 15 hours building a strategy on a false foundation, to a room where she sat and worked in the mornings before the foundation offices opened. And the building came alive with the particular energy of 8 young women becoming who they were going to become. The morning light came through the window the same way it always had. The view of the garden was the same view. The room was the same room. Everything else was different. She heard the building coming alive around her. Footsteps on the stairs, a door, voices in the corridor. The small daily sounds of people beginning their day with somewhere to go and something to do. One of the residents, a 23-year-old from Akron named Dija, who was in her 2nd year of law school and had the kind of relentless analytical precision that Victoria found quietly exhilarating, knocked on the study door and came in with 2 cups of coffee and a question about the Foundation's mentorship network that turned into a 40-minute conversation about how systems actually work in practice versus how they are described in the textbooks that teach you they exist. Victoria answered all of it. She answered with the specificity and directness of someone who has learned what she knows from the inside of actual situations. From the years of standing in rooms where things were decided and watching the gap between the stated purpose and the real one. From the 12 years of managing a structure that was built on a lie and the 3 years of building a structure that was built on the truth. Dija took notes. She asked follow-up questions that were better than the original questions. She left with the coffee and her legal pad and the particular focused velocity of someone who has gotten more than they came for. Victoria sat alone in the study. She thought about Eleanor Sterling in a house in Dayton, Ohio, keeping the books for 2 small businesses with a mathematical mind that could hold multiple systems in place simultaneously without losing a single thread. She thought about what it cost to stay, what it cost to leave. What it cost to spend 3 years building an exit from the inside of someone else's empire, and then stand in a parking garage at midnight and answer a blocked number and decide that the documentation was going to be used for what it was built for, rather than folded away in the interest of continued peace. There was no version of this that had been easy or clean or without cost. Marcus had spent 3 weeks inside a potential conspiracy charge before it was fully resolved. Dr. Lawson had been relocated temporarily and had subsequently taken a position at a different hospital and had written Victoria a letter in July that was 2 paragraphs long and that Victoria had read several times and kept. Vanessa Collins was raising a son alone in a city that was indifferent to the particular kind of exhausted competence required to do that with grace. These were the costs. They were real, and they were not balanced out by the clean logic of outcome. By the fact that the sentencing had happened, and the civil judgments were recorded, and the foundation was operating. And the East Wing was full of people building futures that had nothing to do with Damen Blackwood. Nothing was balanced. That was the truth of it. The world did not settle accounts with the precision of a ledger, and the justice that had come was real, and was also partial, and was also going to continue requiring maintenance and effort, and the specific form of vigilance that comes from knowing now, with complete certainty, what certain people are capable of. But she was here. She was in a room that was hers, in a house that had been remade into something that was not hers alone, doing work that was harder and slower and more real than anything she had done in the 12 years of managing someone else's image. She was 42 years old, and she looked it, and she was finished pretending that looking it was a thing to be managed. She opened her laptop. She had 3 meetings this afternoon, and a call with a foundation board member who wanted to expand the mentorship network to include Chicago, which was a thing Victoria found, given everything, almost funny. She had a draft proposal from Deja that needed review, and a letter from a prospective donor that needed a response, and the particular accumulation of small consequential tasks that constitute a life that is not performed for anyone's benefit except its own. She began to work. Outside the window in the garden that had been planted with intention in the February soil that was waiting for what came next. Nothing moved. The city went on. The building breathed around her. And somewhere in New York, in the particular isolated silence of a situation from which all the borrowed power had finally been withdrawn, a man who had once walked through a door with absolute certainty was beginning the long work of understanding what it meant to have mistaken someone's patience for weakness. He would likely never fully understand it. That was the thing about certain people. The understanding was the one thing that stayed outside their reach. Not because it was hidden, but because it required a form of honesty about themselves that they had never developed the capacity for. He would construct other narratives. He would find other explanations. He would eventually manage to believe a version of events that centered his own suffering and left him blameless, because that was what he had always done. And a federal conviction did not by itself change the architecture of a person's relationship to truth. Victoria had spent a year being angry about that. She was done being angry about that. She was 42 years old, and she had work to do. And the morning light was coming through the window, and somewhere upstairs, a door opened, and she heard Deja's voice talking to someone animated and fast and full of the particular energy of a person who is becoming who they are going to be. Victoria Sterling looked at the screen. She began to type.